This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of May 3rd, 2021. And the subject of this week's podcast changed at the last minute. It changed because I read an article at arstechnica.com that talks about 5G adoption, and specifically millimeter wave 5G adoption. It claims that fewer than 1% of Americans are using this fastest form of 5G, according to some studies that were done by OpenSignal, which is a fairly reliable organization when it comes to measuring this sort of thing. So I set out to read the article, and the more I read it, the less impressed I was. And I have to say, for the most part, I'm usually very pleased with Ars Technica. They tend to be mostly fact-based. And there was a little bit of an edge to this article, implying perhaps that the cellular carriers were misleading customers or something like that, or that 5G was somehow failing. Now, I'm not going to take that personally. It's not like I invented the thing. But I do want to give you the facts so that you have it in front of you. And especially if you're considering an upgrade to a 5G phone, you need to know that 5G is not failing. The carriers are not failing you. That's just not how that goes. In order to understand this article, you have to understand a little bit about 5G technology. So I'm going to bore you for a little bit in order to help you understand what 5G is all about. There are really two types of 5G technology. There's the low wave, medium wave 5G, which is in the 500 to 2100 megahertz range. And while this is a completely different technology to LTE, the previous fastest form of cellular, it does exist in those same frequency ranges. The goal there is to deliver good, fast internet to just about everybody across the country. And this is going to be the most common form of 5G. And then there is millimeter wave 5G. Millimeter wave 5G takes place in some of the frequencies that are normally associated with satellite television, up in the gigahertz bands. And this 5G is blazingly fast, faster than 1 gigabit per second in general. And it's going to be the fastest form of mobile internet that you're going to see for a long time, because it's going to be a while before anybody really needs faster internet than that from their phone. The truth is that most phones today the speeds are being held up by the phone themselves, not by the signal that they're retrieving. And so this millimeter wave 5G is great and it's super fast, but it has a limitation. Because of that really high frequency range, it's only good for most 350 to 500 feet from the tower, oftentimes less. So you've got to have a lot of people very close to a cell tower in order for it to make sense for a company like AT&T to put a millimeter wave 5G tower in. So that's why they do the lower band 5G, so that everybody can get access to some sort of 5G technology that's faster than LTE and that gives all of the great benefits of 5G. But okay, so it's not going to be so incredibly fast it's going to scorch your eyeballs out, and you just have to know that and live with it. It's this lack of access to millimeter wave 5G that Ars Technica is talking about. For example, they say fewer than 1% of people are currently using millimeter wave 5G. Well, I want to kind of say, I want to say a lot of things that include profanity that I won't use in this podcast. Certain statements beginning with the word no and ending with some profanity. Use your imagination, folks. And here's why. So millimeter wave 5G is designed for places where there's really high population density and a real need for internet. So downtown areas where a lot of people would normally work. That's a good place to put millimeter wave 5G. Sports stadiums, especially areas where people are going to tailgate. Another area that people would tend to want to use millimeter wave 5G. Things like that. And keep in mind, this data is not current. This is from a previous quarter. We're not talking about these areas being open today in May of 2021. We're talking about in the winter, in the fall, last summer, that sort of thing. And you see, with very few exceptions, there weren't a lot of people in these areas at that time. People, especially last year, were working from home a lot. Sports was not open. So of course, you're not seeing the usage that this technology was going to have in 2020 and early in 2021. Does that mean that technology is a waste of time or a waste of money, or that somebody has been in some way fooling you? No, of course it does not. What it just means is that, in case you didn't notice, the last year hasn't exactly been a normal one. It's not something that you could have really planned for back when you were putting together an implementation plan back in the early spring of 2019. So I do expect that millimeter wave 5G is going to grow in usage in 2021 and in 2022, and it will never become the dominant form of 5G because you'd need to put a cell tower every 350 to 500 feet everywhere in America. And, in suburbia, that doesn't make a lot of sense. What's that going to serve? Maybe 5-6 homes, something like that? Just not necessary. And there will be new technologies that enable these higher speeds at lower frequencies, but it's just going to take some time. In the meantime, 5G is an incredibly exciting set of technologies, and not just because of the speed. As a matter of fact, the speed is really the least important part of it. Because I think that as I'm saying this in 2021, anybody who claims they need 100 megabit downloads from their cell phone and isn't using it for overall work or something like that, they're just looking for bragging rights. Honestly, if you're streaming video, you can stream a 4K stream, full resolution, about 25 megabit over cellular. And for the most part, using technologies like AT&T's StreamSaver, you're really only using a 2 to 3 megabit stream, even when you're streaming at the highest possible quality. So when you look at it that way, there's no need for 100 megabit speed on most cellular communication, never mind a gigabit speed. No, the most important thing is latency. 5G was built around the idea of reduced latency, and latency is the time that it takes between the time you ask for something and the time you get it. Ask any 4-year-old about latency, and they're going to tell you they understand latency, because if they don't get an answer when they say, "Are we there yet?" in a reasonable period of time, they're just going to ask again. That's what latency is about, is responding to that initial request before the person who made that request feels like there was some sort of mistake and they need to ask again. Low latency connections are incredibly important on things like 5G because they enable things like self-driving cars over the cloud, military applications. Latency makes the web feel faster because you're getting faster responses to the things that you want. When you type in a web address, the amount of time it takes before you get that first draw, that's latency, and that's what makes things feel slow. If you're getting most of a web page in half a second, you really won't care if it takes 10 seconds to get the final things, the ads and the whatever. It just won't be that important to you. And 5G has much, much lower latency. We want as little latency as possible. High latency is bad, low latency is good, and 5G has low latency, and it has it even in the lower frequencies. So it's not like something that you'd have to have that millimeter wave 5G in order to have that. That's one of the reasons that 5G is important. Another reason that 5G is really important is the way it's designed. You can fit a lot more data in the same range of frequencies. It uses better compression and other technologies to help you get the most out of those frequencies. Because, folks, they're not opening up new cellular frequencies right now. They just opened up a whole range in the 600 to 700 megahertz range. And they just opened up some stuff up in the 850 to 2150 megahertz range. And really, the majority of that 5G capacity, though, is coming from existing frequencies that are taken away from 3G and given to 5G, because 5G is going to use those frequencies so much better. That's what it's really about. And so that's something that you need to consider when you're really looking at whether to go from your current LTE phone to a 5G phone. You can get a great 5G unlimited plan on AT&T, while I try to pay the bills. And honestly, that's the most important thing. So That's it for me for the Solid Signal podcast for this week. If you're interested in more about 5G, call Signal Group at 888-233-5834. They can give you a lot more information about that. But otherwise, like and subscribe, and I will talk to you more next week.